Okay, everyone, today we're going to talk about a key social context that sociologists use to understand how it is that the social world around us shapes our lives, who we are, how we behave, and things like that. And that context is social institutions. It's a key way of thinking about what social structure is. And so there are many sociologists who think of themselves as institutionalists who are studying various parts of society through the social institutions that define and govern them. So we're going to talk about what it means to talk about society as a set of social institutions, and how that operates and works, and how those institutions exert an effect on us. Now, when we think about what social institutions are, we can think about them as durable features of society. So these are things that are recurring over and over and over in society. They're not kind of temporary or fleeting, but they're entrenched parts of society that are guided by sets of rules and expectations that define what goes on within some sphere of human activity. So we can think about the economy as a social institution. And in thinking about it as an institution, what we're asking is, okay, what are the sets of rules that govern how we produce and distribute various kinds of goods in our society? We can think about the family as a social institution, where we're asking, okay, what is the family? What are the rules that govern who belongs within particular family units? What are the expectations that we have for different participants and social roles within the family itself? So when we're thinking this way as an institutionalist, there's kind of two basic elements of social institutions that institutionalists focus on. One is formal rules, and these are kind of explicit and formalized sets of rules, oftentimes written down somewhere, that there is a designated body, a designated set of people who are tasked with enforcing those rules. So you can really think about this as the formalized laws, right? I mean, you can think about political institutions in our society as governing the laws that shape how we're able to act. And then we have an entire body who is designated with enforcing those laws, an entire criminal justice system that is organized to enforce those particular laws. That's what we have in mind when we're thinking about those formal rules. Now, the other way, and perhaps even the more prominent way that institutions operate, is through informal expectations. And so these are things that aren't written down somewhere, but that we all kind of know and understand, right? And we understand how we're supposed to, for example, interact with one another in particular kinds of setting. And if you think back to our conversation about socialization, we become socialized into knowing what those expectations are for us and behaving in reference to those expectations, and then being able to kind of gauge and know what the reaction is going to be when we follow those expectations, and sometimes when we buck against those expectations, when we push against those expectations, to be prepared for the reactions that people around us will have. Now let's think then about a particular kind of institution. We're going to spend a lot of our semester focused in on thinking about different kinds of social institutions, but we can think broadly about education as a social institution, and even within that to think about schools as an organizational body that reflect those social institutions. So we can think about then the formal rules of the classroom. So if we're thinking about education as a social institution, and we're thinking about the classroom as a space where we come within that institution, there are formalized rules that govern what goes on within that. Rules defining what the teacher is expected to do and what students are expected to do. So students, for example, can be suspended for doing things like fighting in the classroom, for skipping school lots of times. And those institutions, the schools as an institution, have an entire staff that is devoted towards bringing those rules down to bear on individuals when they violate what those formalized rules are, right? And this can be that those sort of extreme cases of suspending or expelling students for bringing weapons or fighting or things like that. But you can think about the smaller sanctions as well. In a kindergarten classroom, having to move your tag from green to yellow because you were talking when the teacher was talking, right? That's a way of using a kind of formalized sanction where the teacher is the authorized body to enforce that rule. But then there's lots of informal expectations within the classroom as well that we can think about. So for example, in my in-person classroom, students have a tendency to sit in the same seat that they sit in on the very first day of class. There is no formal rule governing that. I don't require students to sit in the same seat, but this pattern emerges and people come to have this expectation, usually by the second week of class, that this is where I sit in class. So much so that when a person is sitting in that seat, other students don't know what to do. So a great little example of this is that I pointed this out to many students in an introductory class some years ago, and I had a student who took up the challenge of sitting in a different seat every single day of the semester. And you knew whose seat he accidentally sat in when that person walked into class and went to walk down the aisle and saw him sitting there, and then would freeze and pause for a second, unsure of what to do and where they're going to sit next, right? So he's violating the expectation of having a formalized seating and an expectation that a person's going to sit in the same seat they've been sitting in all semester long. Okay, so this is just a way to think about schools as a social institution and to think about those formal and rules and informal expectations. So importantly, you should see that these social institutions exert a constraint on some people at some times. They're constraining against some behavior. They mean that some people, some of the time, can't do everything that they may otherwise want to do. And while doing that, they also are creating opportunities for other people at other times, creating opportunities for them to act and engage, and sometimes to exert power over others. So you should really, one of the most, I think, important aspects of understanding social institutions is that they oftentimes define a hierarchy of power. And you can very clearly see that in the classroom setting, where the teacher is authorized with a set of power to govern the lives of students while they're in their classroom. Now, this, of course, doesn't mean that the teacher can just simply do anything that they wish, but they certainly have the power to control many aspects of their students' lives. So that's a little bit about social institutions. Let me know what kind of questions you have, and we'll talk soon.